Distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee, thank you for providing us with this opportunity to speak today. My name is David Magnano. I'm here speaking today in support of H 1547 S 1077 and H 1399 S 1079. I am a survivor of domestic violence. Unfortunately, my mother was not. Her murderer's name was Scott Magnano. I refuse to refer to him as my father, a title he never deserved. 4 months after fleeing for our lives in the middle of the night, Scott's manipulation of the courts brought us back within his reach. On the night of August 23rd, over a decade's worth of slowly escalating coercive behavior culminated when Scott shot and killed my mother in front of me. I was 15 years old at the time. I could easily fill the entire duration of this hearing with stories of his abuse or how the systems that were supposed to protect us failed us. Given the time constraints, I would instead like to share with you a glimpse into the life of someone living under the weight of coercive control in the hopes of showing you the desperate need for bills like these. While I'm a proud adopted son of Massachusetts, I was born and raised in Nutmegger. Growing up in Connecticut, I was taught to respect the civil servants who were looking out for the rest of us. My school system had the same safety officer throughout my entire education, and he was a positive role model for all of us. His open, welcoming nature made it easy to trust the police, and that much harder to resist telling him about what was going on at home. After the violence began, I desperately wanted to reach out to him for help, but I had been trained to be silent. In the back of my mind, I always remembered Scott's threats. If we told the police, no one would believe us, and even if they did, there was no proof, and he'd be released, and then he'd kill us. If we called the police, we'd be dead before they arrived to try to take him away. The weight of his threats hung over us everywhere we went. We had to fear the rules he had set, and the rules he hadn't even conceived of yet, but would inevitably contrive during a burst of rage as an excuse to justify another beating. Nowhere was safe, and there was no one we could confide in without the fear that he'd find out and kill us. Over the years since their passing, I participated in a number of these hearings. Some in Connecticut, which recently passed bills similar to the ones before you today, and even here in Massachusetts, though with less progress in the state I now call home. Whenever my sisters or I make a public statement, I inevitably hear the same comments. If it were me, I would have just left. That's what women get for liking the bad boys. I wouldn't have put up with X. She was just a bad mother. All of these comments see domestic violence the same way the law sees it now. Until there's a black eye or blood has been spilled, it's not violent enough for us to care. From that point of view, the comments make a sick sort of sense, at least from a victim-blaming perspective. Stories like ours, especially when condensed to a brief summary, hit on a visceral feeling that any rational person would reject as unconscionable. It's only natural to want to up and walk away from it as soon as you're confronted with it. If you went on a first date and your date smacked you in the face, you probably wouldn't go on a second date. That's how most people imagine domestic violence. But that's not what coercive control is, and coercive control is what leads, over the long term, to the level of violence our society has deemed newsworthy. Imagine that same scenario. Your partner has just hit you for the first time, but now instead of a first date, that person has been married to you for a decade. You have multiple children together, your finances are intimately entwined, and you've just bought a house. Would you divorce them on the spot, throw away the decades-long relationship, walk away from your home, uproot your children, and put them into an uncertain situation where you know you'd struggle to provide for them on your own? Or would you forgive them, thinking they were stressed and things were heated? Maybe I had brought it on myself. What about the next time they hit you? The 10th time? The 100th time? Where's the line if that first time wasn't enough reason to justify completely upending your life and the lives of your children? When does it go from the heat of the moment to dangerous, ingrained behavior, and will you notice when that line is crossed? Many of these behaviors that lead to the more destructive acts we've come to recognize as domestic violence on their own appear to be mildly unhealthy aspects of a relationship. It's not unusual for one partner to be better at handling the finances. It is unusual for that partner to have unfettered control over and access to the other person's finances and exercise that control in a way that restricts their freedoms. It's not unusual. Mr.
Magnano, you have reached your 3-minute limit, so if you could close.
Sorry, I'll jump to the end, skipping a bunch. In closing, I'll leave you with this reflection gained over a lifetime of firsthand experiences. The people willing to perpetrate this kind of violence don't think like you or I do. They have no compassion for other suffering. They have no respect for the rule of law. They only understand control. When a victim tries to escape, that is when the more violent methods of control are employed, because the abuser is panicking, having realized that the long relied upon nonviolent methods aren't working anymore. It is at that point that the victims are at the greatest risk and in the greatest need of our support. These bills will start to provide that support as best we know how right now. We may not be able to think like these monsters, but we can offer victims the tools they need to identify abusive behavior, counter additional abuse where possible, and hopefully save lives. I've been testifying for more than half my life now that my mother didn't want to be just another statistic. In that memory, let our story serve to show you how coercive control tends to escalate over time into the more violent forms of domestic abuse currently recognized by the law. Update the things we legally recognize as abuse to match the reality we now know, and in doing so, help spare the next 15-year-old from having to wipe his mother's blood off his glasses. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll answer any questions you may have to the best of my ability.